Imagine cutting your daily commute down to, well, zero, gaining incredible flexibility in your schedule, maybe even helping the planet a bit, all while, actually excelling at your work.
It sounds almost like a dream, doesn't it?
It does. But for millions, this isn't some fantasy. It's the actual reality of remote work, the whole landscape of how and where we get things done. It's been fundamentally reshaped, especially these last few years.
Absolutely. A profound shift.
So today, we're really diving deep into the material you shared with us on remote working. We've got these comprehensive reports focusing on ethics and compliance considerations, super important, and also that detailed overview from Remote Work Wikipedia.
Yeah, a good mix of sources to unpack.
Our mission here is to unpack the big benefits, sometimes surprising ones, that remote work brings. But also, we need to shine a light on the challenges because they're often underestimated, right?
Definitely. It's not all smooth sailing.
And crucially, we're going to explore those vital ethical and compliance bits that organizations have to get right if they want to actually thrive in this distributed world.
Mm-hmm. Non-negotiable, really.
And by the time we're done, you should walk away genuinely well-informed, understanding not just the what of this modern work revolution, but really the why and the how for your own situation and, well, beyond.
You know, what's really fascinating as we dug into the history here is how modern this all feels. Like, remote work seems like a product of the last few years, right?
Totally. Pandemic-driven, you'd assume?
But the roots, they run surprisingly deep. It's not this brand new invention. The idea of working from anywhere has actually been around for a long, long time.
It's incredible, isn't it? It didn't just spring up with fast internet. Our analysis showed working from home documented for centuries. Get this. The England and Wales census back in 1911 actually asked if someone worked at home.
1911, that's wild. Long before laptops, even reliable phones for many.
Exactly. Over 100 years ago, it really speaks to this, enduring human desire for a bit of flexibility, maybe. Managing your own time and space?
I think so, that primal pull. But the tech side, the seeds of what we now call remote work, that really started sprouting in the early 70s.
Ah, okay. So what was happening then?
That's when Jack Mills coined telecommuting and telework. Back then, it was all about connecting satellite offices to downtown mainframes. They were essentially using telephone lines as, like, a very basic network bridge.
Huh. Dedicated phone lines, terminals? Sounds almost quaint now, doesn't it?
It does. Clunky, but it proved the concept worked,
Right. And then a big player, IBM, they really jumped on it, didn't they?
They did. It was a significant experiment. In 1979, they started small, letting just 5 employees work from home. Tentative steps.
5 people, okay.
But by 1983, that number exploded to 2,000 people. Think about that. For the early 80s, that was a huge leap, a real vote of confidence in the model.
Wow, 2,000. That's serious commitment back then.
It clearly showed early promise. But the real game changer, the moment remote work started its rapid climb, that came with the digital age, mostly the 90s and 2000s.
Right, when the internet started becoming, usable for most people.
Exactly. Widely accessible internet, collaborative software popping up on cloud computing, and importantly, video telephony. Conference calls with video brought that crucial visual element to teams spread out.
Yeah, seeing people makes a difference.
Huge difference. And we even saw the first digital nomads being described way back in 1992 by Carl Malamud. There were guidebooks like Power Book, a digital nomads guide, coming out in 93.
No way. So the whole work from a beach thing isn't brand new either.
Not entirely. That was the very beginning, the nascent stage of today's truly global work-from-anywhere lifestyle.
So remote work was kind of bubbling under the surface for decades, a slow burn. And then, we all know what happened in 2020. That slow burn became an inferno practically overnight.
That's a perfect way to put it. The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 was this unprecedented global catalyst. It just forced this rapid, incredibly widespread switch to remote work for basically all white-collar employees everywhere.
And organizations were nervous, right? Worried about culture, productivity.
Oh, yeah. Big concerns about lost culture, productivity drops. And employees worry, too, about being isolated or maybe their workload increasing. But the shift had to happen. It was driven purely by necessity.
It really was an unplanned global experiment. The scale is just mind-boggling when you look at the numbers. A 2020 study estimated, 93% of the world's workers lived in countries with some form of workplace closure.
93%. Just pause on that. It wasn't a few companies testing the waters. It was nearly the entire working planet adapting, like immediately.
And because it was so fast, new tech often got rolled out without proper testing or training, didn't it? Which had immediate effects.
Exactly. We saw impacts on physical and mental well-being straight away.
Yeah.
People sitting more, maybe lacking a decent workspace at home, more distractions.
Yeah.
It wasn't an easy transition for everyone.
Definitely not. And has it stuck?
Mm.
Or did things snap back?
Well, some numbers show a slight dip in fully remote work by 2022, compared to the absolute peak. But the practice has largely persisted. It wasn't just a temporary fix. It feels more like a fundamental recalibration of how work actually gets done.
A recalibration, I like that.
Yeah.
So what does this recalibrated landscape look like now? Let's get into some of those stats, maybe starting with the US. They seem to paint an interesting picture.
They do. So a Gallup poll back in September 2021 found 45% of full-time U.S. employees were working from home at least some of the time. 25% full-time remote, 20% part-time.
Almost half the workforce then.
Yeah. And here's the interesting part. A massive 91% of those remote workers, whether full or part-time, said they hope to keep that flexibility after the pandemic ended.
Wow, 91%. That's a really strong preference. What about company culture? Were people worried?
It was mixed. About 54% thought culture would stay the same, 12% actually thought it would improve, but a significant chunk, 33%, predicted it would get worse. So optimism tempered with some real concern there.
Okay, and have things shifted since late 2021?
They have, leaning more into flexibility. Fast forward to another Gallup poll, February 2023. Among employees whose jobs could be done remotely, a big 52% were doing a hybrid model.
Hybrid seems to be the winner, though.
It looks like a very popular middle ground. 28% were exclusively remote in that poll, and only 20% were fully back on site. So yeah, hybrid is definitely a major trend.
And beyond just what people prefer, there's a money angle too, right, for the company?
Oh, definitely. The U.S. Office of Personnel Management reported that federal agencies saved over $180 million in fiscal year 2020 alone, just from remote work.
180 million. That's not small change. That really shows the cost-saving power.
It's huge, a very tangible financial benefit.
And it seems employees are really digging their heels in on this, that 2024 Gallup report.
Yeah, that one's striking. It says half of all full-time working Americans now have some kind of remote option. And here's the kicker. 0% of those remote workers would seriously consider changing jobs if that remote option was taken away.
60%. That's a massive retention risk for companies mandating full return to office. A very loud signal about what people expect now.
Absolutely. It shifted expectations significantly.
Okay, let's hop across the pond. What about the UK? Similar trends?
Broadly similar, with some nuances. A 2022 study showed UK workers averaging about 2 days a week working from home. That's actually slightly above the global average, which was around 1.5 days.
Interesting. And London being a major hub.
London's job market really reflects the shift. In February 2023, around 18% of job vacancies advertised in London were either hybrid or fully remote. Compare that to February 2020 pre-pandemic when it was only 4%.
Wow, from 4% to 18% in 3 years. That's a dramatic change in a huge city like London.
It really is. But just like in the US, it's definitely not a uniform picture across all companies in the UK. There's a real mix of approaches.
Yeah, the reports mention that. Some companies settling on maybe 2-3 days in the office.
Right, fitting that popular hybrid model. But then, an April 2023 survey found this big spike, over 35% of employees reporting they were required back in the office 5 days a week.
Over a third being told full-time in the office. So quite a bit of variation and maybe some pushback from employers there.
It definitely highlights the varied strategies and maybe some tension in the system. The Office for National Statistics data sort of backs this up too. In May 2022, they found 14% fully remote, 24% hybrid, 46% fully on-site.
Okay.
By June 2023, fully remote dipped a bit of 6%, but hybrid jumped significantly to 36%, and fully on-site was holding steady around 48%.
So a real surge in hybrid, but still a huge chunk of jobs remaining fully on-site. It's clearly still evolving, isn't it? A balancing act.
A complex, constantly shifting balance, exactly.
Yes. So we've seen how fast things changed and where we roughly are now. But let's dig into the why for companies. Beyond just adapting, what are the real upsides, the tangible benefits they're seeing? Because it seems like it's way more than just saving money on rent.
Oh, absolutely. That cost reduction piece is significant, but it's just the start. One of the big shifts we found is how it fundamentally changes the company's balance sheet. It's not just cutting the rent check, it's strategically repurposing capital.
Repurposing how?
Well, think about all the money tied up in physical infrastructure. Office space, yes, but also parking, utilities, lighting, heating, even things like office supplies, furniture. Suddenly, a chunk of that capital is freed up.
Right. Money that can go into what? Innovation. People?
Exactly. Reinvesting in innovation, employee development, better tech, strategic initiatives, it opens up options that weren't there before.
Okay, so cost is big, but what about productivity? Because
Yeah.
that was a major worry initially, wasn't it?
Huge worry. But counterintuitively, for many traditional managers, our analysis shows remote work can actually lead to enhanced productivity in many cases.
Really? Enhance. What's driving that? Is it just fewer people stopping by your desk?
That's part of it, sure. Fewer office interruptions allows for more focused, deep work,
Yeah.
but I think there's something deeper linked to autonomy and trust.
Ah, the psychological side.
Yeah. When employees feel trusted, empowered to manage their own environment and schedule, they often step up. They become more efficient, more engaged. We saw data showing remote employees getting higher supervisor ratings, better performance appraisals.
That's fascinating. And some surveys showed employers themselves observing this.
Yeah, some reported over two-thirds of employers noticing increased productivity. It really flies in the face of that initial skepticism.
Okay, so cost savings, potential productivity gains. What else? The reports mentioned talent acquisition being a huge advantage.
Massive. Think about it.
Yeah.
Suddenly, companies aren't restricted by geography anymore.
Right. You don't have to live within commuting distance.
Exactly. You gain access to this much wider, more diverse pool of skilled employees, of expertise, regardless of where they live. If you need someone with very specific skills, you're not just looking in your city or region. You're looking nationally, even globally.
That's a huge competitive edge in finding the best people.
Yeah.
A total redefinition of the talent landscape.
Absolutely.
And, another counterintuitive point seemed to be collaboration. You'd think being remote would hurt teamwork, but the findings suggest sometimes the opposite is true.
Yeah, it surprised me too at first. But it makes sense when you dig into it. The deliberate nature of remote communication can actually foster better collaboration
How so?
because you often have to schedule things more intentionally. Those easily scheduled virtual check-in meetings, for example, can create stronger, more structured feedback loops between employees and leaders.
So being forced to be more structured can actually improve things.
It can. It allows teams, including crucial functions like ethics and compliance, to get involved earlier in decision-making. There's less chance of things happening informally and key people being left out. It requires more clarity, which can lead to deeper engagement.
Okay, and this structure feeds into operational efficiencies and even innovation. Can you give some concrete examples from the reports?
Sure. There's a great example from one organization. They managed to complete their entire annual ethics program assessment virtually. Usually that involved tons of travel to different sites.
Right, flying people around, hotels, expensive and time-consuming.
Exactly. Doing it virtually eliminated all those travel costs and the time involved. Plus, they could present all the recommendations to the whole executive leadership team at the same time. Super efficient, accelerates decisions.
That's a fantastic example. Streamlining a core process using the remote model. What else?
Well, training, too. Rolling out updated annual ethics training, for instance. Many companies move this entirely online, self-paced. Employees like the flexibility, and it streamlined the whole rollout for the company.
Makes sense. People learn at different paces anyway.
And risk reviews. Multiple organizations actually said their risk reviews became more open, egalitarian, informative, and productive using virtual tools.
More egalitarian.
Because they weren't limited by the physical size of a conference room. You could have more voices, critical people from different locations, joining in easily. It makes you wonder, like the report suggested, how many good ideas got lost in the past just because someone couldn't physically be in the room.
That's a really powerful thought. And it wasn't just big formal reviews, right? Even smaller interactions.
Yeah, things like interviewing subject matter experts or working closely with compliance staff in different locations. Doing that remotely removes the old barriers of travel time and cost.
Yeah.
You can get expert input much faster, more frequently. That's huge for being agile with risk assessment.
Okay, so clear benefits for the organization. But what about the employees themselves? Because that's equally important.
Absolutely. And the benefits there are significant too. Consistently, we found remote work often leads to higher job satisfaction and motivation.
Why is that? The autonomy again.
Primarily, yes. That greater autonomy and flexibility seems key. Employees feel more in control of their work lives. And this translates directly into loyalty.
Loyalty. How so?
Companies offering remote options saw turnover rates that were 25% lower in some studies. And get this, 81% of employees reported feeling greater loyalty to their employers when they had flexibility.
25% lower turnover, 81% feeling more loyal. Those are powerful numbers. Shows that direct link between flexibility and keeping your people.
Absolutely. And that autonomy naturally feeds into something else people crave, better work-life balance.
Ah, yes, the holy grail. How specifically does remote work help there?
It's about integrating work with life in a way that actually suits the individual. You can create your own routines. And importantly, if you can have a dedicated workspace at home, separate from, say, the kitchen table.
Right, creating a physical boundary.
Exactly. That helps you physically leave work at the end of the day. It creates that mental separation. The commute isn't blurring the lines anymore. You close the laptop and you're home. That distinction is vital.
It really is. And this flexibility, it also opens up possibilities for people to move, doesn't it? Relocation.
Precisely. Remote work basically untethers people geographically. Maybe they want to move to a city with more opportunities in their partner's field, or find a lower cost of living, or be closer to family.
And people are actually doing this.
Significantly. In 2020 alone, the estimate was 2.4% of Americans. That's nearly 5 million people moved because of remote work. That's a huge demographic shift, impacting local economies, communities, everything.
Wow, 4.9 million people. And finally, there's a wider benefit too, right, for the environment.
Yes, absolutely. It often gets overlooked in the productivity debates, but it's important. Less commuting means fewer cars on the road.
Simple math.
Simple math with a big impact. Lower CO2 emissions, cleaner air. We saw that quite clearly during the pandemic lockdowns when commutes just plummeted. It's a definite win for sustainability.
Okay, the benefits are clear, compelling even. But we have to look at the other side of the coin. Remote work isn't a perfect solution, and the challenges are significant. Organizations and employees really need to grapple with these downsides to make it work long-term.
That's exactly right. And one of the biggest challenge areas we identified centers on communication and connection, or maybe the lack thereof.
How so? We have video calls chat. Isn't that enough?
Well, the reports argue, and I think it resonates, that digital tools just don't fully replicate the richness, the nuance of face-to-face interaction. Think about immediate feedback, subtle body language, tone of voicing, things we process almost subconsciously in person.
Yeah, you lose a lot of that data over video and almost all of it on a phone call or chat.
Exactly. And those nuances are crucial for processing complex information, for really understanding each other. Their absence can lead to miscommunication, misunderstandings.
And this loss of nuance makes it harder to build what the report's called common ground. What does that mean exactly?
Common ground is that shared understanding, that feeling that everyone's truly on the same page, not just hearing the words, but grasping the context, the intent. It's harder to establish remotely because we lose those key characteristics of communication, like co-presence, actually being there together, and visibility, seeing reactions. It's like trying to build a complex mental model without all the pieces. Audio-only calls are especially tough. Video helps, but it still takes more deliberate effort than just being in the same room.
So it requires more conscious work to get everyone aligned.
Much more. And it's not just formal communication either. Think about those spontaneous chats, the water cooler moments, bumping into someone in the hallway.
Yeah, where quick questions get answered or you just pick up on things informally.
Exactly. That facilitates quick information sharing, the transfer of what they call tacit knowledge, the stuff that's not written down. That's largely absent remotely. So sharing information needs to be much more deliberate, more proactive, which takes time and effort.
And the reports mentioned grounding techniques. What are those?
Basically, the ways we check for understanding. In person, it's often quick and nonverbal. Remotely, especially over email or chat, you have to use alternatives that are often slower and require more work. Email, for instance, can lead to what's called egocentrism. You assume the other person knows what you know, which leads to confusion. The cost of getting grounded, of ensuring understanding, just goes up.
And all this communication difficulty, it must impact individuals directly, right?
Yeah.
Their performance, their well-being.
Absolutely. The research showed that feedback mechanisms can be less immediate, less clear remotely. This can lead to more role ambiguity, people being unsure about their exact responsibilities or what's expected of them.
Which sounds stressful.
Very. Higher role ambiguity is consistently linked to more conflict, frustration, exhaustion, and ultimately lower job engagement. It can really wear people down if they feel uncertain about their role.
And does it matter if the manager is remote too?
It seems to. When managers themselves are remote, employees sometimes report lower job satisfaction. They might feel communication is slower, less clear, and they get fewer opportunities for feedback. That sense of managerial distance is a real hurdle.
Okay, so communication is complex. What about the direct impact on employee well-being and just motivation? Because that feels like a huge piece of this puzzle.
It's massive.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest concerns is isolation. Plain and simple loneliness. Remote work can make it harder to build those casual workplace friendships because you lose the informal interactions.
And those friendships matter, don't they?
More than we might think. Research consistently shows social integration is important for longevity, and just routine social interactions are vital for mental health. Workplace loneliness? It's directly linked to lower commitment, both to the company and to your colleagues.
That's a really sobering point. And it's not just mental health, is it physical health too?
Right. That shift during the pandemic, it led to people sitting more up to 2 hours more per day in some studies. Plus, concerns about physical and mental strain from maybe not having a proper desk set up at home or dealing with more distractions from family or roommates.
Yeah, the ergonomic nightmare of the kitchen table office.
Exactly. And all this ties into motivation challenges. Let's be honest, remote work isn't for everyone. It demands a high level of self-discipline, self-motivation. Without the energy of an office, you really have to rely on your own internal drive.
And if the work itself isn't varied, or there's less teamwork?
That can hit intrinsic motivation hard. And just the social isolation itself, as we mentioned, is linked to lower motivation. It's tough to stay fired up when you feel disconnected.
And there's that added pressure too, right? The feeling you have to constantly prove you're being productive.
Yes, that's a real thing.
Mm.
Remote workers might feel this unspoken need to over-deliver just to counter any perception that they're slacking off.
Which sounds exhausting.
It can be. That pressure, combined with isolation, can ironically lead to lower job engagement, according to a 2012 study. Its complex job satisfaction might go up initially with remote work, but then it can plateau or even dip slightly as it intensifies, often because people feel feedback or the significance of their tasks has decreased.
It's a delicate balance, maintaining that engagement long term.
Very delicate.
And the work-life boundary issue. Flexibility is great, but it can cut both ways.
Absolutely. Without that physical separation of office and home, it's easy to slip into an always-on mentality. Fully remote workers might hesitate to take vacation time or feel they constantly need to be available. That can lead straight to burnout and deepen feelings of isolation. It's hard to switch off.
Yeah, the laptop is always right there.
Exactly.
And we also need to touch on the gender disparities that some research highlighted.
Yes, that's a crucial point. Several independent studies found that remote work, especially during the pandemic, unfortunately made existing gender inequalities worse. Women often ended up shouldering more of the domestic work and childcare on top of their jobs.
So it's not a neutral change. It interacts with existing societal structures. We need policies that account for that.
Precisely. Ensuring equitable support is vital.
Okay, shifting gears slightly to the management perspective. What are the hurdles from their side? Oversight seems like a big one.
It is. Managers might naturally feel cautious about remote work because they have less direct oversight. And there's research suggesting a potential bias bet. Managers sometimes judge contributions based more on who they see in the office rather than the actual quality of the work being done remotely.
The visibility bias. That's a real challenge for fairness.
It definitely is. And this impacts higher level functions too, like reporting to the board.
How so?
Well, if board meetings or reporting sessions are done virtually, there's a concern the quality of interaction might decrease. You need the right tech, yes, but also really inclusive ways of presenting and facilitating discussion to make sure it's as effective as being in the room. Getting that rich debate can be harder.
And paradoxically, while remote opens up the talent pool for hiring, it can make retention harder. How does that work?
It's an interesting flip side. If a company relaxes location requirements, it might become harder to keep specialized staff, like, say, compliance experts. Why? Because location isn't a barrier for them anymore either. They can look for opportunities anywhere.
So the same factor that helps you hire makes it easier for people to leave. Interesting.
Exactly. It means companies need really strong retention strategies that go beyond just offering remote work.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Now let's dive into arguably one of the most complex areas. The ethical and compliance challenges in this remote world. This is where the report's really focused, and it's critical.
Absolutely critical. And a key finding was how remote work can create this out-of-sight, out-of-mind problem for ethics and compliance teams themselves.
How do you mean?
Without a shared physical office, those spontaneous encounters, those casual check-ins, they just don't happen as much. This makes it genuinely harder for E&C professionals to build trust with senior leaders and get that crucial seat at the table when early decisions are being made. Less visibility can mean less influence.
That's a huge structural challenge for E&C, and it goes beyond the team's visibility, right?
Yeah.
What about things like the code of conduct?
Yeah, think about it. In an office, there might be posters, constant subtle reminders of the company's strategy, its values. Your physical environment reinforces it. At home, your environment is,
Yeah.
well, your home, full of personal stuff.
Right, less corporate branding.
Exactly. So companies have to get really creative to make sure employees still feel connected to the organization's vision, its strategy, and importantly, its ethical guidelines. It requires deliberate effort.
And this lack of oversight, the home environment, it raises concerns about conflicts of interest.
It does. With less direct supervision, and maybe having easy access to work tools at home, companies worry more about employees potentially starting side businesses or taking on gig work that might conflict with their main job.
So clear rules about using company resources, laptops, software, even time become essential.
Absolutely vital. Policies need to be crystal clear on expectations there.
And what about reporting misconduct? Does remote work impact people's willingness to speak up?
The report suggests it can. Those weaker interpersonal connections we talked about, maybe disrupted communication channels, less day-to-day visibility for managers or E&C, plus more distractions at home. It can all lead to a slower flow of information about potential risks.
People might hesitate more or just not notice things as easily.
Both. It can potentially reduce reporting activity and maybe even lower employee confidence in feeling safe to share concerns. That's a serious risk for any organization that values integrity.
Definitely. And the biggest risks of all, perhaps, cybersecurity and data privacy.
Huge. Remote work fundamentally shifts risk priorities here. Organizations must ensure their security measures are robust enough for a distributed workforce. Data privacy procedures need rethinking. How is data being handled off-site? Policies need updating for remote work scenarios.
And employees need to be aware of their rights and the company's rights regarding personal data and using company equipment.
Crucially aware, it's a whole new level of complexity for risk management. You absolutely have to get security and privacy right.
Okay, it's clear the challenges are real, they're complex, they touch everything from culture to security. But the good news is organizations are finding ways to succeed. Let's pivot now to the strategies, the best practices for navigating this remote world. First up, how do you build and maintain a strong culture of integrity and connection when everyone's spread out?
This is absolutely foundational. Our analysis really stressed that leadership and the E&C team have to be partners. Ethics and compliance can't be siloed. They need to be woven into the fabric of how the organization operates successfully.
Like that blue ribbon panel principle, E&C needs a seat at the strategy table from the start.
Exactly. Not just reacting after the fact,
Right.
but helping shape goals with integrity in mind.
So embedding it strategically. And then how do you cultivate that ethical culture day to day when you're remote?
It's about constantly highlighting integrity, talking about it in decision-making, showing how it applies to solving real problems, and encouraging everyone to model those behaviors. It's about making integrity a visible, lived value, which helps build that sense of community and connectedness, even remotely.
Making it tangible, and connection itself is key. How are companies getting creative with virtual team building?
They're definitely leveraging technology. We saw examples like virtual trivia nights, online charades, drawing games. Basically, finding ways to bring employees together for some fun and social interaction.
So replacing the spontaneous office fun with intentional virtual fun.
Pretty much. The reports noted that remote teams that find ways to have fun together tend to build stronger bonds. It creates those shared positive experiences.
And beyond games, what about just fostering interaction?
Intentionality is key. Things like scheduling periodic face-to-face meetups if possible, or even just regular video calls that aren't purely task-focused. Having a designated spot for remote workers when they do visit the office. And managers making time to discuss personal and professional goals one-on-one shows individual care.
What about using chat tools for fun?
Yeah, setting up dedicated fun channels on Slack or Teams, places for people to bond over shared interests, movies, pets, fitness, whatever. It helps replicate some of that informal office chatter. Even virtual happy hours or cooking classes can boost morale and connection.
And wellness seems to be a theme too.
Definitely. Organizing things like virtual lunch break yoga, meditation sessions, maybe group Peloton classes. It encourages healthy habits, but also creates another shared experience. Plus, holding inclusive company events throughout the year, even virtually, helps reinforce values and connect different departments.
Another strategy mentioned was mentorship or buddy systems. How does that work remotely?
It works really well, actually. Just having regular contact with one trusted colleague or mentor can make a huge difference to a remote employee's sense of belonging. And remote work makes it easy to pair people from different offices or locations.
Oh, interesting. So it can actually expand networks across the company.
Exactly. It breaks down those geographical silos and fosters skill sharing in new ways. It's all about building those crucial one-on-one connections.
And acknowledging people's work is always important, maybe even more so remotely.
Absolutely. People need to feel seen and valued. Establishing digital peer-to-peer recognition systems is a great way to do this. It lets colleagues acknowledge each other's contributions easily and reinforces positive behaviors publicly.
Okay, great points on culture and connection. Now, communication. We know it's harder remotely. What are the best practices for making it effective?
Well, first off, communication needs to be constant and varied. For a distributed workforce, you can't over-communicate, really. Many organizations are using company-wide newsletters frequently, maybe weekly or even more often, alongside other channels. It's about finding that new rhythm.
And it's not just how much, but how clear, right? Setting standards.
Absolutely critical. Establishing clear communication norms is key. Things like, when is chat appropriate versus email? What are reasonable response times? What's good email etiquette? This prevents people feeling overwhelmed by messages, reduces interruptions, and just makes interactions smoother, creates predictability.
And managers have a big role here too.
Huge role. They need to be encouraged to have much more frequent check-ins with their teams. Not necessarily long meetings, but regular touch points. It gives people opportunities to engage, ask questions, raise concerns, helps bridge that potential communication gap.
What about training? How does that need to adapt?
It needs to move away from the old default of in-person sessions. Most information-based training should be more just-in-time, meaning triggered when someone actually needs that specific info and on demand, available whenever suits the employee. Much more flexible and tailored.
And transparency, especially around sensitive processes like investigations.
Super important for building trust. Organizations should be open about how investigations work, demystify the process. When people understand it, they trust it more, and that should make them more willing to report concerns.
And learning from issues is key too. Sharing lessons.
Yes, regularly looking at reporting data, spotting trends, identifying emerging risks, and then communicating these back to employees. Sharing anonymized case studies, what was the issue, what steps were taken, what was the outcome, helps frame problems and shows accountability.
Creates that feedback loop, which leads to the final point on communication. Dedicated feedback channels.
Essential. You need ways for employees to share what they don't like about the current culture, and suggest improvements. Making sure people feel heard is vital for adapting and keeping the culture healthy in a dynamic remote setting.
Okay, so we've covered culture, connection, communication. Now let's tackle mitigating those risks and maintaining compliance, which we know is complex remotely. What are the core strategies here?
Well, the starting point has to be robust business continuity planning. And not just having a plan, but continuously reviewing and revising it to make sure it fully supports remote work scenarios and stays aligned with regulations. It's an ongoing process.
Makes sense. And the code of conduct, how do you keep that visible when there are no office posters?
Got to get creative. The report suggested things like virtual drop-in sessions focused on the code, maybe making it fun with E&C quizzes that offer some kind of recognition for participating. Anything to make it an active part of the remote workday, not just a document people read once.
Embedding it. And given the security and data privacy risks, nearly 20% of companies reported an impact there. What are the must-dos?
You absolutely have to verify your security measures are strong enough for a distributed workforce. Robust procedures for data privacy compliance are non-negotiable. Company privacy policies need updating to cover remote work specifics. And crucially, employees need clear training on their rights, the company's rights, and the proper use of company tech and handling of data. Protect the assets, protect the privacy.
And there's potential conflicts of interest, like side gigs. How do you address that clearly?
Policies need to be explicit. They have to clearly state the company's expectations on using company resources, laptops, software, work time, for anything outside the primary job. No ambiguity allowed, basically.
Okay. And encouraging reporting, making it safe and easy.
Vigilance is key. Companies need to constantly communicate and advertise all the available channels for reporting concerns, maybe even exploring new ones. Leveraging existing chat platforms, internal social media like Yammer, maybe user-friendly anonymous reporting apps.
The idea being more channels means earlier detection.
Exactly. More frequent notice can lead to earlier detection of brewing issues, allowing the company to step in before things escalate.
And underpinning all reporting is the non-retaliation message.
Cannot stress that enough. Companies need to hammer home their zero-tolerance stance on retaliation and recognize that retaliation might look different, maybe more subtle, in a remote environment, so you need to be extra watchful. People must feel safe speaking up.
And if an investigation does happen, documentation becomes even more critical.
Yes, because discussions might happen virtually, maybe processes are slightly different. The quality of the investigation could face more scrutiny later on. So diligent, thorough documentation of every single step taken is incredibly important. It ensures transparency and accountability.
Right, got it. Finally, let's talk about supporting employee well-being and productivity. This feels like where the rubber really meets the road for making remote work sustainable and positive.
Absolutely. And a big part of this is a mindset shift for management, implementing a results-oriented work environment.
Focusing on outcomes, not just time spent at a desk or physical presence.
Exactly. Trusting your team, focusing on the quality of their work, their skills, the results they deliver. It requires extra care to make sure E&C principles are still embedded in these new processes, but it's about shifting focus from presence to performance.
And then actively championing work-life balance. What are some practical tips the reports offered for employees?
Some really good concrete ones. Encouraging people to prioritize tasks, maybe using that 1-3-5 rule. One big task, 3 medium, 5 small ones per day. Helps manage workload.
Okay, that sounds manageable.
Also, promoting sticking to a daily routine, even though you're flexible. It provides structure. And advocating strongly for that dedicated physical workspace, separate from family hubs if at all possible.
That physical separation again, so you can mentally switch off.
Crucial, so you can leave work at the end of the day. Also emphasizing nurturing relationships outside work with friends and family and setting realistic goals for each day. Trying to do too much leads to burnout. Achievable lists build a sense of accomplishment.
And managers are key to enabling all this.
Absolutely central. They need the training and tools to support their teams effectively in a remote setting, especially around raising issues and engaging productively. Manager training is vital. They set the tone.
And using tech for quick feedback, like pulse surveys or anonymous chats.
Yeah, integrating tools like anonymous live chat or quick pulse surveys into platforms like Teams or Slack can provide a real-time line of discussion and feedback.
And this isn't just about general morale.
No, this general cultural feedback can often be a leading indicator for potential compliance or ethics concerns. It allows for much earlier detection of issues bubbling under the surface, enabling proactive steps instead of just reacting later.
Okay, so as we wrap up this really comprehensive deep dive, it seems undeniable. Remote work isn't going anywhere. It's a permanent fixture now, isn't it?
Unquestionably, the pandemic accelerated it, but the shift is fundamental and lasting. Our analysis really confirms this, and it highlights that ethics and compliance teams have a huge opportunity here, a strong enabling role to play in helping companies succeed and achieve their goals in this new normal.
So E&C isn't just adapting, it can actually lead in shaping this future.
Exactly. Helping build resilient, ethical, distributed organizations.
And technology will keep evolving, presumably making the experience better.
Oh, for sure. We can expect advancements in system design, processing power, bandwidth, all leading to enhanced remote communication. Think less delay, smoother video, maybe even more lifelike displays of people on screen, making virtual interactions feel even more seamless.
But here's the interesting counterpoint. Even with better tech, the research suggests face-to-face interaction will still be important. What's the takeaway there?
It's a crucial reminder, isn't it? Technology is an amazing tool, but it doesn't fully replace genuine human connection. There will likely still be challenges with using the tech effectively. User skills gaps. It underscores that tech supports, but doesn't substitute for, a human element. Finding that right balance will remain key.
So it's not about choosing one or the other, but blending them effectively, which means organizations need to keep evaluating and adapting.
Constantly, they have to continuously evaluate their program, as the report said, adapting how they meet the needs of a remote or hybrid workforce, ensuring E&C is involved in strategy, making sure risk assessment works across all environments. It's a journey of continuous evolution.
And what a journey it's been, tracing this from, the 1911 census question to today's global reality. We've seen the incredible benefits, cost savings, productivity boosts sometimes, better work-life balance, a wider talent pool.
And the environmental plus, too, don't forget that.
Right. But we've also dug deep into the challenges maintaining culture, ensuring communication clarity, managing those tricky ethical risks like conflicts of interest and data privacy, and crucially, supporting employee well-being against isolation and boundary blurring.
It's definitely a landscape with huge opportunities, but also real pitfalls if you're not intentional about navigating it.
And that seems to be the key takeaway from our deep dive. Intentionality. Proactive strategies are essential, fostering integrity, really prioritizing connection, both virtual and maybe occasional in person, using tech smartly, and supporting people holistically. It's this constant balancing act.
Between the virtual and the human, exactly. And as we keep blurring these lines between traditional and remote work, it really leaves us with a big question, doesn't it?
Mhm.
How are we collectively going to redefine what it even means to be a team or a community when being in the same physical space isn't the default anymore?
That's a profound question. And maybe tied to that, what new innovations, not just in tech, but in, I don't know, human connection, empathy, trust building, what new things will emerge as we all strive to collaborate effectively no matter where in the world our colleagues happen to be? It's a fascinating thought to ponder as the future of work continues to unfold.